2 Samuel 19. Now, it's been a couple weeks. Obviously, last week was kind of out of the blue. We didn't have Sunday school last week. And so just to remind you where we are, Absalom had rebelled. David and his men fought against Absalom and his forces, and they were successful. Absalom died. He got caught in the tree, and Joab killed him. And so the news got to David at the end of chapter 18, and David is he's mourning. He's crying out for his son, and that just flows right into chapter 19. And then really there's probably, if I had to say, I would say that probably chapter 19 is a bad chapter break. I mean, you can see where the flow is just an absolute continuation from chapter 18. But anyways, chapter 19, verse 1, it says, "And it was told Joab, Behold, the king weepeth and mourneth for Absalom. And the victory that day was turned into mourning unto all the people. For the people heard say that day how the king was grieved for his son. And the people gat them by stealth that day into the city, as people being ashamed steal away when they flee in battle. But the king covered his face, and the king cried with a loud voice, O my son Absalom, O Absalom, my son, my son. And Joab came into the house of the king, and he said, Thou hast shamed this day the faces of all thy servants, which this day have saved thy life, and the lives of thy sons and of thy daughters, and the lives of thy wives, and the lives of thy concubines, and that thou lovest thine enemies, and hatest thy friends. For as thou hast declared this day, that thou regardest neither princes nor servants, for this day I perceive that if Absalom had lived, and all we had died this day, then it had pleased thee well. Now therefore arise, go forth, and speak comfortably unto thy servants, for I swear by the Lord, if thou go not forth, there will not tarry one with thee this night, and that will be worse unto thee than all the evil that befell thee from thy youth until now. And then the king arose, and he sat on the gate. And they told unto all the people, saying, Behold, the king doth sit in the gate. And all the people came before the king, for Israel had fled every man to his tent. And all the people were at strife throughout all the tribes of Israel, saying, The king saved us out of the hand of our Lord, out of the hand of our enemies, and he delivered us out of the hand of the Philistines. And now he has fled out of the hand out of the land for Absalom. And Absalom, who we anointed over us, is dead in battle. Now therefore, why speak ye not a word of bringing the king back? And King David sent to Zadok and to Abiathar the priest, saying, Speak unto the elders of Judah, saying, Why are you the last to bring me the king back to his house, seeing the speech of all Israel is come to the king, even to his house? You're my brethren, and you're my bones and my flesh. Wherefore then are you the last to bring me back to bring back the king? And say to Amasa, Art thou not of thy bone and of my flesh? God do so to me, and more also, if thou be not captain of the host before me continually in the room of Joab. And he bowed the heart of all the men of Judah, even as the heart of one man, so that they sent this word unto the king, Return thou and all thy servants. So the king returned and came to Jordan, and Judah came to Gilgal, and to meet the king, to conduct the king over Jordan. We'll pause right there for now. And so there's kind of a lot that happens in this chapter, but I think we'll be able to get through it here pretty quickly. And so, as I said, the beginning of the chapter here is David really just dramatically mourning. Now, this is really in keeping with David's character, with his nature. We've talked about this and have seen this already several times in particularly 2 Samuel, whereas David's, if you want to say Achilles' heel, David's blind spot is his family. Now, obviously, we understand it's women as well, right? We understand that. But David is, he has a blind spot for his family. He really doesn't... He doesn't really care for justice to be done if justice is happening upon members of his family. He wants mercy always for family. And there's a stark contrast there because, right, we've seen David deal with, for instance, the man who came back and told David that he saw Saul out in the field and had been mortally wounded but not dead, and Saul called out and said, Hey, come kill me, which we know didn't happen that way, but David didn't know this at the time. And so what did David do? David strikes that man down on the spot because he dared to touch the king. And so David, we know, has a sense of justice and knows what justice is and what justice should look like when it's outside of his family. And so when it comes to his family, David has a tremendous blind spot. And so here, Absalom had done terrible, awful things, not just to David. And David was really willing to overlook anything done to him personally. And if it was only done to David personally, then maybe he has a leg to stand on to say, no, let's have grace, let's have mercy. But it wasn't just to David. It was not only to David, it was against the entire kingdom. But in doing so, we talked about this in chapter 18, I think it was chapter 18. But in doing so, Absalom had really rebelled against God because God chose David. David was not a democratically elected individual whom the people had, buyer's remorse for. No, David was put there by God. And so by rebelling against David, this is a rebellion against the very actions of God himself. And so we understand the severity of Absalom's sin in this whole matter. And so when word gets back to David that Absalom was dead, at the end of chapter 18, he already starts wailing, "Oh, my son Absalom, my son." He said, "Would God that I had died for thee." This is the last verse of chapter 18. "Would God I had died for thee, O Absalom, my son, my son." And so he continues that weeping on into chapter 19 in that morning. And again, there's a fine line. You want to be understanding because a man has just lost his son. Right? And so you have to have some understanding that, yes, there will be a time for mourning. There will be a time for weeping. There will be a time for that. But right now is not that time. Right now, you are not just a father. Right now, you are a king. And your people who have just literally laid their lives down on the line for you are watching you for what they're supposed to be doing. And this is Joab. Now, listen, Joab has a lot of faults. But Joab was 100% right in this. What he does, what he says to David, was absolutely the right thing in this particular instance. And so and I can say that because you see how what should have been a time for rejoicing, what should have been a time for victory parades, and God's king is back on the throne. Not just the king, God's king is back on the throne, not the rebellious traitor. God's king is back on the throne. There should have been absolute rejoicing and feasting and celebrating in the land of Israel, but that's not what happens. Because you see in verse 2, it says, "And the victory that day was turned into mourning unto all the people, because the people heard say how the king was grieved for his son." And then verse 3, it says, "The people got them by stealth that day in the city, as people being ashamed steal away when they flee into battle." And so here, whereas there should have been rejoicing and victory parades and all the things, when that should have been going on, no, now everybody's weeping and mourning because that's what David's doing, and they're sneaking back into the land instead of rejoicefully coming back into the land as the victors. And so you can see here that David's actions are having a terrible side effect for the people. And remember back to chapter 18, David didn't go out to fight. Now, he wanted to. He was going to. But they specifically came to David and said, "No, in this particular instance, it would be best for you to stay behind and let us go fight this battle for you." And so they did. They went and fought for David. And so here, David is not even taking a second to mourn or weep for those who laid their lives down on the line for him. No, his mourning and his weeping is for the rebellious traitor who caused their deaths. And so you can see why Joab is so strong here. Now, Joab, we've talked about this in the past, is fiercely loyal. Will do anything, and literally anything, to make sure that David's position is sure and that David is on. He will do these things, not because necessarily he cared so much about what was right and he cared about God's man being on the throne, but he's David's right-hand man. And so as David's right-hand man, he's going to do whatever he needs to do to make sure David's position is sure. And so we've never really seen Joab be this sincere with David before. And so you understand how much this struck at the heart of Joab to see David's actions leading the people to act this way. And so he comes to David, and he lays it on the line. And again, I think he's right. He says, "For this day I perceive that if Absalom had lived and all we had died, it would have pleased you well." And I think he's right. I think David, in that moment, whether or not he would have vocalized it that way, his actions were saying this. His actions were saying that was 100% true. And so Joab presses David to go speak to his men before he loses the loyalty of all of the people who just fought so valiantly for him. And so Constable, and he says, Joab urged David to remember that he was a king as well as a father and to behave like a king. Right now you're just thinking like a father, but you also have to remember you're the king, and you have to act like it. And so David takes his advice, and to his credit, and we talked about this in chapter 18 too, David is a wise man. David knows when to give advice. David knows when to listen to advice. And he did that in chapter 18. He does it here again. And so David, and he goes to the gate, and he speaks to the people. And so there's a kind of a bookend on the story here, because this is the exact same place where Absalom went and the whole rebellion started. If you remember back several chapters ago, Absalom would go to the gate, and when people would come to bring some kind of grievance before the king, Absalom would stand out there, and he would just say, oh, that there was a judge in Israel. You'll never get to talk to David. Right? David will never listen to you, but I would. Man, if only I were judge, if only I were king, I would listen to you. I would do battle for you. I would go to bat for you. And so it was in that very place where Absalom stole the hearts of Israel, which is what it says in chapter 15, where David comes and he speaks to the people. And so there was a natural bookend on this whole story. And so the problem with Absalom is over. The problem with Absalom is ended. But just because you have put down the rebellion doesn't necessarily mean that everything just falls back into place as it was. This is a fractured people. This is a splintered nation. And so this is a dangerous point in David's reign, because the people are, I think you could say, rightfully confused. And you see this in verse 9. It says, and all the people were at strife throughout all the tribes of Israel, saying, the king saved us out of the hand of our enemies, and he delivered us out of the hand of the Philistines. And now he has fled out of the land for Absalom. But also, verse 10, and Absalom, whom we anointed over us, is dead in battle. Now, therefore, why speak ye not a word of bringing the king back? And so they're confused. We had this great king in David who was so victorious in battle, led us out of the oppression of the Philistines. As the songs go, it has killed his 10,000s, right? David is renowned for the things that he's done, and we throw our support behind him. But then Absalom arose and stole our hearts away, and we supported Absalom. We put Absalom on the throne. And David was running. But now Absalom is dead. And so why are we not just bringing David back? Well, there's some people who are saying, well, we should just bring David back. David's the rightful king anyway. And there's other people who are saying, no, David left. David abandoned the throne. David's not the king anymore. And so, like I said, this is a fractured nation. And so there's a lot of confusion going on. And so to answer this kind of confusion, David sends word to the priest, and he begins in Judah. And so David's ultimate goal was obviously to unify the nation. I mean, that's obviously what he wanted to do. But you have to start somewhere. And so David chose, and probably rightfully so, chose to do so with Judah. If there's anybody who should be the most eager to throw their support back wholly behind the king, it should be your own tribe. And so he begins with the tribe of Judah. And so those of Judah were hesitant, right, to do this, and they had not yet come out and said, welcome the king back, let's get you back in throne. And so what was likely happening, and we're kind of having to read between the lines a little bit here, what is likely happening is that those of Judah were likely worried about retribution. And that's probably what led to most of the hesitancy in Israel. Most of the hesitancy to just welcome David back with open arms is probably because what they're doing is they're comparing what they think David might do to the other kings of other nations around them. Because here's what they know. The pagan kings of the other nations, if something like this had happened and that guy gets back in power, what's he doing? He's putting down with severity everybody who turned their back upon him. Right? He's just going to come through and just wipe out whole peoples who he thinks either supported the enemy or was some kind of detriment to him coming back to the throne. And so they're probably worried about some kind of retribution from David. And so David, he tries to quell this a little bit. And so he begins by telling them, no, you are bone of my bone, right? Flesh of my flesh. Essentially, he's using the marriage language here. You're my people. You're my brothers. You're my tribe. I would not do that. But also, and to kind of give some solidarity here, he promises to make Amasa his captain. Now, this is interesting. Joab is already his captain. And this very well could be, I think, solving two problems for David. Number one, he's probably, whereas he saw the wisdom in it, probably not too happy with the way Joab came and put his finger in his face and said, what you're doing is wrong. And David has understood for a while now the zealousness of Joab and his willingness to do whatever needs to be done to stay in the position he's in was a danger. David could see this, and so he's probably been looking for some kind of way for a while to get Joab out of that position. But also, if those who had followed Absalom were worried about retribution from you, one thing that you could do is say, hey, the man who led your army, I will make him my captain. And so that's what he does. Amasa led the armies of Absalom. And so David says, he will be my captain now. So there's somebody, not just somebody, one of the most important members of my cabinet, to use the vernacular, one of the most important men will be somebody who was, for lack of a better phrase, on your side. And so, this would bring some unity. This would bring some solidarity. And so he promised to do that. And he does do that, but as we'll see in the coming chapters, Joab doesn't let that happen for very long. And so his plan works. The text says that he bowed the heart of all the men of Judah, even as the heart of one man, so that they sent this word unto the king, return thou and all thy servants. And so let's continue. Hold on. Let's go a little bit further. And so what they do is they send a contingent to Gilgal, which is where David was, to escort David across the Jordan and essentially welcome him back to Jerusalem, welcome him back to the throne. And so it was important for David to gain back the support of the people he had lost, not only, as we've just talked about, to help heal and mend the wounded Israel, to bring back those splintered groups. Obviously, if you're a king, it's much easier to be king over a united people who support you than a splintered faction nation, and some people support you, some people don't. And so David understands the importance of that. But also, there's theological implications here where you want the people of God to be united around God's man, right? And so that's also important. But also, we're going to see this in the next chapter. It's quick. It's almost a blink and you miss it kind of thing. But there will be another attempted uprising against David. And so it's important that he gain this support and have a strong support for him for the coming trials in the next chapter. And so the rest of the chapter then kind of highlights some individuals and the interactions that they have with David as he's crossing the Jordan and coming back into Jerusalem. And so verse 16, it says, And Shimei the son of Gera, a Benjamite, which was of Bahurim, hasted and came down with the men of Judah to meet King David. And there were 1,000 men of Benjamin with him, and Ziba the servant of the house of Saul, and his 15 sons, and his 20 servants with him. And they went over the Jordan to the king. And there went over a ferry boat to carry over the king's household, and to do what he thought good. And Shimei the son of Gera fell down before the king, and he was come over, or as he was come over Jordan. And he said unto the king, Let not my lord impute iniquity unto me, neither do thou remember that which thy servant did perverse of the day that my lord the king went out of Jerusalem, that the king should take it to his heart. For thy servant doth know that I have sinned. Therefore, behold, I am come the first this day of all the house of Joseph to go down to meet my lord the king. But Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, answered and said, Shall not Shimei be put to death for this, because he cursed the Lord's anointed? But David said, What have I to do with you, you son of Zeruiah, that you should this day be adversaries unto me? Shall there any man be put to death this day in Israel? For do I not know that I am this day king over Israel? And therefore the king said unto Shimei, Thou shalt not die. And the king sware unto him. And let's read a little bit farther. And Mephibosheth, the son of Saul, came down to meet the king, and had neither dressed his feet, nor trimmed his beard, nor washed his clothes, from the day the king departed until the day that he came again in peace. And it came to pass, when he was come to Jerusalem to meet the king, that the king said unto him, Wherefore wentest thou not thou with me, Mephibosheth? And he answered, My lord, O king, my servant deceived me. For thy servant said, I will saddle me an ass, that I may ride thereon, and go to the king, because thy servant is lame. And he hath slandered thy servant unto my lord the king. But my lord the king is as an angel of God. Do therefore what is good in thine eyes. For all of my father's house were dead before my lord the king. Yet didst thou set thy servant among them, that did eat at thine own table. What right therefore have I yet to cry any more unto the king? And the king said unto him, Why speakest thou any more of these matters? I have said, Thou and Ziba divide the land. And Mephibosheth said unto the king, Yea, let him take all, for as much as my lord the king is come again in peace unto his own house. So we'll pause there for a second. And so, like I said, he begins to have these various interactions with these individuals. And so what's being done here, what it seems to be done here, is it's showing kind of representatives of various factions and how David has positive interactions with these as, again, kind of representatives as a whole. And so there's a couple of representatives from the tribe of Benjamin. Now, you have to remember, the tribe of Benjamin was Saul's tribe. If ever there was a people who would be antagonistic toward David, it would be those of Benjamin, those who, for one reason or another, might think that David came across the throne in the wrong way, or were angry that the throne didn't go to a relative of Saul, that it didn't pass through. We saw at the beginning of 2 Samuel, they tried to do this, right? The nation split, and they tried to throw their support behind a descendant of Saul, and it just didn't last. And so David here shows forgiveness to some of these Benjamites in a show of solidarity. And so the Benjamites had hoped for David's downfall as punishment for taking the kingdom from Saul. Now, we see this particularly in chapter 16. If you remember, as David and his men are kind of fleeing Jerusalem, there's a man called Shimei, and he was out there cursing David. And he's saying this, right? You're the wrong king. You shouldn't have taken the throne from Saul. It should be a descendant of Saul upon the throne. He's saying all these things. And so Shimei had cursed David for these very reasons. And so Shimei now, I will say it this way, I'll put it that way, seems to repent of this. And so Shimei, along with 1,000 men from Benjamin, and Ziba with his household come to meet David, and he comes across the Jordan. Shimei here admits his sin in cursing David. He tells him, I shouldn't have done that. Right? You need to forgive me of this. And to show how serious I am about this, I'm the first from the northern tribes to meet you. I brought 1,000 men from Benjamin. We're here showing our support. I'm sorry for what I've done. And so, again, it seems very genuine. It does on the outset. And then Abishai, almost exactly as he had done the day that Shimei was cursing David, he tells David, let me just go kill him. This guy doesn't deserve forgiveness. Let me go kill him. And, of course, just like he did before, David calls him down. You can't do this. He tells Shimei, thou shalt not die, and the king sware unto him. And so this was an important moment for this kind of re-entering into the kingship, because David did not need the Benjamites or anyone for that matter to think he was about to start handing out judgments. Right? If I cast down Shimei right now, if I have him killed, what is everybody else going to think who turned against me? Everybody is going to be fearful. This might lead to other revolts. Right? That's the last thing David needed at this moment. Now, it's unclear, and it's really only unclear for one reason, but it is unclear if this was genuine repentance on the part of Shimei. And if all we had was this particular text and we didn't have anything else mentioning this, I would say it really does seem as if Shimei is genuine and he feels regret. But it also could be that now Absalom's gone and now David's back, and if I want to keep my head, I better show some forgiveness, or I better show some repentance to the king. And so it could be that he's just trying to get on David's good side. Now, as I say here in the lesson, it does seem genuine, and I think the way that it is written, it seems genuine. However, in 1 Kings chapter 2, David is giving instructions to Solomon, and he says in verses 8 and 9, he says, And behold, thou hast with thee Shimei, the son of Gera, Benjamite of Bahurim, which cursed me with a grievous curse in the day when I went to Mahanaim. It says, But he came down to meet me at Jordan, and I swear to him by the Lord, saying that I will not put thee to death with the sword. But then he tells this to Solomon, Now therefore hold him not guiltless, for thou art a wise man, and knowest what thou oughtest to do with him. But his hoar head bring thou down to the grave with blood. And so it seems as if David never believed Shimei's repentance was genuine. David tells him here, he doesn't say, I forgive you, notice. He just says, how does he word it? He says, thou shalt not die. He doesn't say, I believe you, you're forgiven. He just says, I'm not going to kill you. That's all he says. But it seems as if David never believed him, goes to his grave not believing him, and actually gives instructions to his son, hey, the second I'm dead, you go take that guy's head. And so for one reason or another, David could be completely wrong. Shimei could be 100% genuine. But at the very least, David didn't think he was. And so that's the only thing that really gives me pause, because I believe that the way that it is written here does lend us to believe the genuineness of Shimei's words. Maybe so, maybe not. But then David meets another Benjamite, that in Mephibosheth. Now, obviously we understand the story between David and Mephibosheth. Mephibosheth was Jonathan's son, had been injured as a child, was lame on his feet as a result. And David, because of his love for Jonathan, took Mephibosheth essentially as his own son and said, you will eat at my table, you will have the king's meat. I will place Ziba and his entire household as your servants. They will do what you want. And so, he really genuinely cared for Mephibosheth. Well, when he was fleeing, Ziba comes to David. And David asks, where's Mephibosheth? This is what he would be curious about. And Ziba says, David, you don't want to know. He left. He's trying to get the throne. He's the last living heir of Saul. And so he's trying to get the throne. David was heartbroken about this. And he just says to Ziba, well, then you just take everything. Right? Everything that he had is yours now. So this is the last thing David had heard about him. And so as he meets Mephibosheth here, we see that was all a lie. Ziba completely lied about all this. And so we see in verse 24, it says, then Mephibosheth, the son of Saul, came down, and he had neither dressed his feet, nor trimmed his beard, nor washed his clothes, from the day the king departed until the day he came again in peace. These were signs of mourning. Mephibosheth was in genuine mourning that David was fleeing, that David was on the run. David genuinely cared for Mephibosheth. Mephibosheth genuinely cared for David. And so there was a genuine love there between both men. This is why David was so hurt when he thought that Mephibosheth had abandoned him. And Mephibosheth here was clearly worried about David, and it was going through natural rites of mourning for David. And so David calls out to him, right? Why didn't you come? Essentially, what happened? Why did you abandon me? And Mephibosheth had to tell him, no, everything he told you was a lie. I did try to come to you. Ziba was supposed to go get me a donkey so that I could come out to you, and then he never did it. He just left, and then he went to you and told you that I was trying to take the throne. And so, Mephibosheth essentially tells him, Ziba just lied about the whole thing. And then he tells David, he says that you are as an angel of God, do therefore what is good in thine eyes. So even after all this, Mephibosheth had been slandered, had been lied about, but even after that, he basically throws himself at David's feet and says, I'm at your mercy. If you think what I've done is worthy of death, then I will be happy to die. This is how much Mephibosheth loves David. And so David, he says, why speakest thou any more of the matters? I have said, thou and Ziba divide the land. Now, this is a controversial thing. David believes him, obviously, or he wouldn't give him any of the land. But why does David still give Ziba part of the land? Why does David still split that? Why doesn't Mephibosheth just get all of it? Well, I think there's two reasons. Number one, yes, Ziba was a liar. We know that. But back in chapter 16, when Ziba came to David to make up this lie about Mephibosheth, if you remember back in chapter 16, he brought David a load of provisions. Ziba brought enough for David and his men to kind of survive for a while. And so, whereas, yes, he had lied, he also sustained David and sustained David's men. And so, I think that's part of the reason why David said, listen, I won't go so far as to take it all away, but you're losing half of it. But also, secondly, David had already made this promise to Ziba, and so it would be difficult to probably reverse it in total. And so he halfway reverses it, and he lets Ziba and Mephibosheth split the land. And then Mephibosheth shows his true devotion. He says, yea, let him take all, for as much as my lord the king has come again in peace unto his own house. Mephibosheth says, I don't care about any of that. I don't care about the land. I don't care about owning anything. All I care about is that you're back, you're king, and you're safe. Let him have all of it. None of that matters to me. And so what is interesting about this, and I didn't put this in here, I maybe should have, but this is similar to the case that Solomon will stand over, which is the women bringing Solomon the baby, and without going into the whole thing, both of them claim this is my child, and what do we do? And so Solomon, he says, well, cut the baby in half, you get half and you get half. And why does he say that? Because he knows that the real mother will say no, right? And so the real mother, so one of them said, yeah, it's fine with me, because her son had already died. She didn't care anymore. But the true mother said, no, let her have all of it. right? I care more about the son being okay. I care more about the life of this individual. I don't need to have it. And so this is kind of the same thing. Mephibosheth said, I care more about your life. I care more about your health, about your position. I don't need that. Let him have it. I don't care about any of that. And so this is exactly what they do. They do split that land. And so David has another meeting with another man, Barzillai, verse 31. And Barzillai the Gileadite came down from Rogelim, and he went over Jordan with the king to conduct him over Jordan. Now Barzillai was a very aged man, even 80 years old. Brother Lynn, don't take any offense to that. He was 80 years old. I can't control this. And he had provided the king of sustenance while he lay at Mahanaim, for he was a very great man. And the king said unto Barzillai, Come thou over with me, and I will feed thee, I will feed thee with me in Jerusalem. And Barzillai said unto the king, How long have I to live, that I shall go up with the king unto Jerusalem? I am this day 80 years old, and cannot discern between good and evil. Can thy servant taste what I eat or what I drink? Can I hear any more the voice of singing men and singing women? Wherefore then should thy servant be yet a burden unto my lord the king? Thy servant will go a little way over Jordan with the king, and why should the king recompense it with such a reward? Let thy servant, I pray thee, turn back again, that I may die in my own city, and be buried in the grave of my father and of my mother. But behold thy servant Chimham, let him go over with my lord the king, and do to him what all seem good unto thee. And the king answered Chimham, shall go over with me, and I will do to him that which shall seem good unto thee. And whatsoever thou shalt require of me, that will I do for thee. And all the people went over Jordan. And when the king was come over, the king kissed Barzillai and blessed him, and he returned into his own place. And then the king went on to Gilgal, and Chimham went with him, and all the people of Judah conducted the king, and also half the people of Israel. And the chapter ends with this. It says, And behold, all the men of Israel came to the king, and said unto the king, Why have our brethren, the men of Judah, stolen thee away, and have brought the king and his household, and all David's men with him over Jordan? And all the men of Judah answered the men of Israel, Because the king is near of kin to us. Wherefore then be you angry for this matter? Have we eaten at all at the king's cost, or hath he given us any gift? And the men of Israel answered, and the men of Judah, and said, We have 10 parts in the king, and we have also more right in David than ye. Why then did you despise us, that our advice should not be first had in bringing back our king? And the words of the men of Judah were fiercer than the words of the men of Israel. So we'll get to that here in just a moment. So the last person we read of here is Barzillai. And we've seen Barzillai before in a couple of chapters ago. And similar to Ziba, Barzillai, who we see here, was a wealthy man. He brings a load of provisions for David and his men. Very much cared for David. It's very evident in our text. And so here we see that Barzillai was an elderly, wealthy man who loved the king. Now David asks him, right, it would bless me if you would come with me all the way to Jerusalem. Now Barzillai is not an Israelite. He's a Gileadite. He's from another nation. But David loved him, and he says, hey, I would really appreciate it if you would come with me all the way to Jerusalem. And Barzillai responds, listen, I'm too old. I'm losing my faculties. This is what he really means by verse 35. Right? Can I discern between good and evil? Can I taste what I eat or drink? Can I hear my mind's not as good as it once was. I can't taste as good. I can't hear as good. Right? And he's losing his faculties. And so he basically says, I don't want to make this long trip and not be able to get back home to Gilead, where if I'm going to die, I want to die in my homeland, right? We get that. We understand that. And so, David respects that. But he says, if you want to show me respect, take my servant Chimham. And so David does that. And so I think what's happening here is David showed forgiveness and kindness and relationship with the Benjamites, which was important for David, given his relationship to Saul. And then here with Barzillai, he shows his relationship with the Transjordan tribes and nations, those being on the other side of Jordan, nations whom Israel, just per geography, would need to have strong ties with if they wanted any notion of peace. And we see today why that matters. Israel has very little peace with very few of the nations that surround them, and we see the kind of things that result from that. And so it would be incumbent upon David to have good, strong ties with that Transjordan area. And so Barzillai here kind of represents those strong ties that David had. And so as David finally comes to Gilgal, we see the support of Judah, and that half the people of Israel had brought him over, probably meaning representatives of half the tribes. They bring David over. However, this argument breaks out about Judah's role. The rest of Israel are saying, hey, hold on. You represent 1/12 of Israel. We have a greater share in David than you because we represent 10 tribes, right? Why do you get the sole right to bring David over? Why do you get the sole right to do all this? And Judah says, well, first of all, we are kin to him. This is our brother. This is our blood. And so we have a right to do it from that. And also, you seem to be suggesting that there has been kind of an under-the-table deal here. We haven't accepted anything from the king. There has been no favors given to us that David is promising us, that he's not promising anybody else. This has all been on the up and up. However, more arguments ensue. And so verse 43, it's this ironic thing, because verse 43 has the people of Israel fighting with the people of Judah, essentially over who supports David more now. And so it's a very fascinating way for this chapter to end, because where has he been for the last several chapters? On the run, because his son stole the hearts of the whole nation. And they were fighting against David and his men. And now the fighting that's taking place is over, no, we love David more. No, we love David more. No, we want to support David more than you want to support David. And so it's this weird, complete 180 turn of events where instead of fighting against you, now they're fighting amongst each other to support you. And so thus is the hand of God in these endeavors to put his man back on the throne. I want to end with this quote from Davis, because as always, he does such a good job of bringing this into a New Testament application. It says, the rightful king has returned, but there is no peace in the kingdom. The animosity and envy among his subjects threaten the stability of his kingdom. The negative situation, however, carries a positive witness. The kingdom must truly be the kingdom of God, or it would have self-destructed long ago. And he goes on to say, surely Jesus is building his church, or it would have vanished long ago. And just as surely the kingdom is the Lord's, or it would have been swept away in the sewage line of history before David's greater son ever appeared in the flesh. And so essentially here's what he's saying. You look at the absolute mess that Israel is in at this particular point, having run off the rightful king, and now you can't even have a civil conversation with one another about the way in which to reinstall the king, fighting over everything you could possibly fight about. And yet, Israel remains, right? And Israel would be a nation for several hundred more years, and then they would be completely destroyed and dispersed among the world. And yet, Israel still remained. You get to the time of Christ, and guess what? There's a nation of Israel. It's an unthinkable thing. And then guess what? They get destroyed and dispersed among the world. And then guess what? There's a nation of Israel still. Now, I understand that the nation of Israel today is far different from the nation of Israel in the Bible, but the people of Israel, the Jewish people, still exist today. Even though they're hated, hunted, killed by the millions, the people of Israel still exist today. And so that in and of itself is a testimony to God's perseverance and God's protection. And so you parlay that into the discussion of the New Testament and the church in particular, not to say that the church has replaced Israel, that's not the argument I'm making, but as God has protected and preserved the nation of Israel, God has protected and preserved his church. And it's a good thing, because if the church was just left up to us, if the church was just left up to people to run and manage and grow, it would have stopped existing 10 years after Jesus was resurrected, right? I mean, it would have never have worked. But the fact that the church still exists 2,000 years later, and not just exist, but has grown and in this ironic way grows seemingly more when it's persecuted, when people try to stamp it out of existence, that's when it does better than ever. And so because of this, we have a testimony to the fact that God is over his institution. God is over his people. And that more than anything should give us a comfort to know that this isn't, Grace Baptist Church is not my church, right? Grace Baptist Church is not my authority. Grace Baptist Church is God's church. This is Christ's church. I'm just some fool he chooses to use to guide things for him, right? And so this isn't my church. And that's a good thing, right? And that's how the church exists. It is Christ, it is his, he's building it, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. And so the nation of Israel give us kind of an Old Testament picture of that. And this chapter kind of gives us an interesting view of that, because everything seemingly that could go wrong with Israel did go wrong with Israel, and yet Israel remains. All right, there's always a remnant. And an interesting chapter, to be sure. And we don't have just a whole lot left in 2 Samuel. David is quickly coming to the end of his life, and then we transition over to Samuel once we get to 1 Kings. And so that's all coming up, relatively quickly. Over the next couple months, we'll be there. So just keep that in mind as we move forward. But let's pray, and then we'll be dismissed.